But up first, I am very excited about our guest and the work he is doing. Groundbreaking work, and folks, I do not say that lightly. Right now, God is revealing the truth of the Bible through archaeological discoveries in the Middle East, in the land where it all happened, including Saudi Arabia. Our first guest, Ryan Mauro, has the inside, on-the-ground story. Here's a bit more about him.
Ryan Mauro is a well-known security analyst and the president of the Doubting Thomas Research Foundation, a nonprofit that researches possible reconciliations between biblical history and modern understanding of science and archaeology. His new documentary film, Finding the Mountain of Moses, the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, reveals new discoveries. Here to talk about these discoveries, please welcome Ryan Mauro.
Now, this New York City crowd, Ryan is no stranger. He's a New Jersey resident. Not that far from New York City. Jersey Shore, but the good part for everyone listening. Well, Ryan, great to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
And you're here. You're usually in Saudi Arabia.
I know. That's where I've been. Brought my mother to Saudi Arabia on the third trip going there in order to research this film that we've put out. We didn't even intend on creating this film. It just was part of the research project to find out where the real Mount Sinai is and whether these rumors about this stunning evidence of the Exodus story were really true. And we went there. Turned out it is true, and the footage that we got is incredible, and just telling the story to friends and family required me putting it essentially in documentary form, and then there it was. Wasn't even my intention, and now we're at almost 1 million views on YouTube with $0 on advertising.
Wow. Ryan, it has gone viral for a few reasons. Number one, it's completely cutting edge. You were on the ground in Saudi Arabia, a place few Westerners go, especially not with their mom, by the way. On the ground in Saudi Arabia, and this is just incredible footage, real-life footage of some of the sites from the Exodus story. Ryan gives very compelling evidence that Saudi Arabia, not the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, where tradition says is where Mount Sinai was, where Moses was handed the 10 Commandments, the golden calf was worshipped, everything from the biblical Exodus story. You say it's not Egypt, it was actually in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Now, the discovery of this Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, there's actually black on top of the mountain because God appeared in a pillar of flame, right, to Moses.
Right.
Let's back up. We're going to get into all of that. There's so much to unpack, and it's a great 25-minute video that you produced. But let's back up. Tell us, first of all, how your interest was piqued in Saudi Arabia, in Mount Sinai. How did you wind up pursuing this on the ground in Saudi Arabia?
Sure. Well, shortly after I became born again, I was probably 11 or 12 years old. And you know me personally. You know how cynical I am. I need evidence for everything to a degree that's kind of ridiculous. And so I began my relationship with God, and I felt his presence. But then as I began studying the Bible, I had a problem. Which is that the consensus, even among Christian university professors, was that there's very little actual evidence that the Exodus story happened. So as I'm trying to understand this relationship with God that I felt, I started questioning. I say, well, is the Bible really accurately describing whatever this is that I'm feeling? And then I heard about this theory based on some people who had snuck into Saudi Arabia over a period of decades, but had their evidence confiscated, that the real Mount Sinai was actually in Saudi Arabia, which would explain why there was a lack of evidence at the traditional site in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, as we call it today. We know that Moses fled to Midian, which would be mostly or entirely northwestern Saudi Arabia. So that should be the first spot that you look. And so I studied the theory, didn't fully buy into it, especially because I'm not an archaeologist, and it just kept tugging at me. I would research it and know the facts and find myself something pulling me back towards it and reading it again, even though I wasn't learning anything new. And it just kept stirring in my mind, and then basically a miracle happened in my heart. Yeah, for sure. And then just a miracle happened. One of those crazy series of coincidences that happen that are mathematically impossible. And I had a chance to go. And because of my work in studying counterterrorism in the Middle East, I had these media connections and understanding of the region that enabled me to leverage that platform in order to get the word out about what I saw in Saudi Arabia. And so for me, it's just amazing to look back and see how this was stirring in my heart. I didn't understand it at the time, and it just has come full circle. And now amazing things are happening. Even the Iranian regime and the Muslim Brotherhood are now reacting to this video because it's gotten so much attention because we release it in Arabic.
Wow.
So a lot of our traffic is coming from the Muslim world right now.
Wow, amazing. I would say that God planted this on your heart. Seems pretty clear from a young age. Okay, what did you see in Saudi Arabia? You get there, you're on this great adventure, this great journey, kind of your Indiana Jones hat there on in the desert. So what did you see in Saudi Arabia? What kind of compelling evidence did you find?
Well, the first thing that I noticed was that Saudis that lived in the area have this long tradition that Moses and the Yahud, as they call them, the Jews, were there. And so this isn't a secret to them. To them, this is just common sense. And one of the first things that Saudis approaching me would say, without me having to approach them because they just want to interact with the American because they'd never interacted with an American before, they'd say, "Hi, how are you? What are you doing here? Did you know Moses was here? Really? Do you want me to show you where all this happened?"
Wow.
And that happened in almost every interaction. And so we got to see the well where Moses may have met with Jethro's daughters for that first interaction in an area that's known locally as the land of Jethro.
Wow. This is Saudi locals who live there. It's part of the local lure.
Yeah, they say, my grandfather told me when I was young, and his grandfather told him. And it's not a secret to them. It's actually surprising that we don't know about it.
Wow.
And so that's really amazing to see. And they basically mapped out what we had already researched, that if you follow the Bible like a treasure map, and you pay attention to those little directions that you don't remember when you read the book of Exodus because there's no frame of reference, it's saying you're turning left or right here, north or south, you follow this path, you run into evidence of almost everything described in the book of Exodus.
Wow. Give us an example, probably the most famous example, Mount Sinai.
Sure. So when you first show up at this possible Mount Sinai, it's a mountain called Jebel Makla. It's on the Jebel al-Lawz mountain range. The first thing that you'll notice from quite a distance is the blackened top. And so it's tempting. It actually means burned mountain in Arabic. And so it sticks out like a sore thumb, and you're like, what is going on there? Yeah. Now, some people will say that that is just a natural occurrence because there are other mountain peaks that will have a blackened top. But I've got to tell you, when you look at the other pieces of evidence that are there, it's like a movie set for the book of Exodus, then that means something. There's too many things lining up right there that match the story for something like that to not be significant. So there's debate about whether that's actual evidence of God descending as a fire, and
would have clearly blackened the mountaintop if God, coming down as a pillar of fire, caused that mountain to be charred.
Right, and so some people say it was burned or it melted away the top and the basalt underneath is being exposed, and then some people say, oh, it's just natural. But that's just the beginning of the case.
Yeah, and you lay it out. Another part of the case that Ryan makes, and if you're just joining us, folks, we are here with Ryan Mauro. He's made a great new film called Finding the Mountain of Moses, the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. He's getting to the bottom of an ancient mystery, I guess you would say. Another piece of evidence, Ryan, I think is very compelling, is the split rock.
Yes.
Where Moses brought water out of the rock, and you saw what you believe is that very rock.
This is amazing. It's on the western side of what we think is Mount Sinai, which again aligns with the path of the story described in the Bible. And it was originally found by Jim and Penny Caldwell, an American couple that was working in Saudi Arabia in the early 1990s. And you go into this remote area, but you're following the route that we believe is the Exodus route, and you come across a hill that's about 100 feet high, and then on top of it is a gigantic rock split down the middle. And on the inside and underneath it, you can see what looks to be water erosion. Like you could draw it and say, that looks like a river came down from that gigantic split rock.
And folks, when you see the film, this rock, it's stunning visually. I mean, this thing's in the middle of this wide open kind of desert area. It's big, it's elevated, and it is split right down the middle. It is one of the most odd-looking archaeological formations, I have to say. Something's going on with that rock.
Right, and I remember a lot of people told me I wouldn't be able to access it because the locals will kick you out, and yes, they will. And people were saying, well, it's a forbidden military zone, so we were unlikely to get in there, but we did. And I remember texting you a picture of me at the Split Rock right after we got in. And it's amazing because the Split Rock is somewhere between 40 and 60 feet high. And so when you look at the drone footage in our film, I look microscopic.
Yeah.
And you think about it, it makes sense. There were a lot of Israelites. It wasn't some small rock in a small stream. It had to be something massive. And there's enough of a landmass underneath it that is flat enough that they could have camped.
Yeah.
I mean, logistically,
hundreds of thousands, maybe
sense.
well over 1 million.
Right.
Of Israelites in the desert there after the Exodus.
Yeah, there's not too many places where you can do something like that. And so to see all those logistical things that are required for this story to happen in real life be present there is amazing. But before that part in northwestern Saudi Arabia, if I may, I'd like to talk about the Red Sea crossing.
I was just going to ask you because you mentioned that. Let's back up to the beginning of this whole story.
Sure.
Before they wound up in Saudi Arabia, they had to flee in the Exodus. Tell us about the route that they took.
Right, so it's very clear that they went out of Egypt, and the evidence does indicate that the modern-day traditional Mount Sinai is within area that Egypt probably controlled. So it doesn't make sense on multiple levels, and that's why you're not finding evidence there. So you can either conclude the Exodus didn't happen, or you can look elsewhere. Most people chose to assume it didn't happen.
That's true. That's among some archaeologists, some scientists, Ryan. There's this strain of belief, very strong, that the Exodus never happened. It's just a bunch of made-up stories. They think that about most of the Bible, but in particular, they have tried to debunk the Exodus story.
Right, and so you follow what we believe is the path out of Egypt that they would have taken across the northern part of the modern-day Sinai Peninsula. And thanks to Google Earth, technology that we haven't had until recently, the Red Sea crossing point seems almost obvious. There's a gigantic beach by the mountainous wilderness that just sticks out like a sore thumb on the Gulf of Aqaba, part of the Red Sea, where you could fit millions of people. And right at that point, under the water, is a land path. So you have steep sides, and then if you were to part the waters, you got to have somewhere to walk.
Yeah.
There's somewhere to walk. And it would bring you over to northwestern Saudi Arabia, right into the area where the local Saudis say, this is where Moses and the Israelites came. Wow. And there is some speculative evidence that in the coral around this land path, you can see shapes that resemble Pharaoh's destroyed army. You can't prove it, but because the coral would wrap around an object and then dissolve what's inside of it, but retain that shape. So it's described as looking like an ancient junkyard.
It really does, Ryan. That's one of the fascinating aspects of the film. These look like chariot wheels, folks, but kind of the erosion, whatever you would say, the barnacle formed around them. But it clearly looks like chariot wheels at the bottom of the sea, at the bottom of the Red Sea.
And I've talked to divers who've done a lot of diving, so it's not just me looking at pictures and saying, oh, could that be Pharaoh's army? No, divers who've done a lot of diving, I've talked to and have dived there, have been like, I've never seen anything like this. This is not normal. This is clear evidence that something went on here, and the coral grabbed onto all those pieces of whatever was destroyed.
Yeah. And I love that you captured drone footage. I think I'll use the word, folks, epic, to see drone footage of this area, as you'll see in Ryan's film. Okay, tell us about Elam, the 12 wells, and the palm trees and their significance.
Right. So one of the stops on the way to Mount Sinai is a place called Elam. It's an oasis where there are 12 wells for the 12 tribes of Israel and 70 palms. Now, over time, the palm trees would reproduce and become more numerous. But when we went to the spot that makes sense geographically as Elam, and the locals pointed out as Elam, there are 12 wells.
Wow. And
there's plenty of room for camping. And you can see the palm trees still there. Yeah. So that lines right up.
Yeah. It's amazing, Ryan. All of the evidence is lining up geographically, archaeologically there, the formations. I don't know. I haven't seen the evidence for the South Sinai site, which has been kind of the traditional site. But man, oh man, what you guys are uncovering here in Saudi Arabia is pretty compelling. Of course, folks, when we think of the Exodus story, we think of the Jewish people wandering in the desert, the Israelites. We think of the golden calf and the worship of the golden calf as Moses goes up on Mount Sinai to meet with God and get the Ten Commandments. You believe, and to me this is one of the most fascinating parts of the film, Ryan, that you found the very spot where the golden calf was worshipped. Share some of that evidence for us.
Sure. Well, let me be clear. I'm not claiming that I discovered anything. Other people had done research, but I did get access to these areas and got modern footage so people can actually see it instead of just seeing old footage or pictures and people speculating. Now you can actually judge it. And yes, right in front of what I believe is Mount Sinai, there is this sectioned off spot that the Saudis have declared as an archaeological site with fences, and there's a nearby police station to make sure you don't come in, where there's a collection of rocks that looks to me like the stand where the golden calf would be and an altar in front of it. Now here's the evidence for it, aside from where it's placed. You look at it, and there's inscriptions all over it of people worshiping a bull.
That was one of the most mind-blowing aspects of it, Ryan. These ancient drawings of exactly that, what you just said, of calf worship, recording, unfortunately, what they were doing.
Yeah, and there's this weird spot on the top of the golden calf stand, we believe, where it looks like a worn-down circle at the top. Now, we know that Moses destroyed the golden calf.
Yeah.
So is it a coincidence that right at the top of this, there looks to be as if something was just smashed over and over again right on the top?
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And the locals also will accuse you of possibly searching for gold because the tradition is so strong. They're like, well, we know that a lot of gold was here because of the golden calf being
molded
here.
into a golden calf.
Yeah.
And folks, I always imagine the righteous anger that Moses felt when he came down from Mount Sinai. I can't even imagine what was going through his mind when he saw the golden calf being worshipped after he was just communing face to face with God Almighty. Wow.
And where it's placed, if you imagine being Moses, you could see how he would see it as he was coming down. That's what's so incredible.
It was right in his face when he descended Mount Sinai, Ryan, as you said. Okay, that's a bad aspect, the golden calf worship, obviously, but a good aspect, Moses' altar and the 12 pillars. Tell us about that. And the cave of Elijah. Tell us about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, for the cave of Elijah, we know that Elijah went to a cave at Mount Sinai, and there's only one distinct cave on the mountain, and it's right above this spot that is at the foot of the mountain where it appears to be an ancient altar. Now, the Bible says that God instructed Moses to build an altar for animal sacrifices made of uncut stone at the foot of the mountain. You go to the foot of the mountain, there's an altar of uncut stone. You can see where the animals would be lined up. And God also told Moses, set up 12 pillars to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. There's about 12 pillars there. Wow. And then the cave is up above that. So it makes sense that Elijah would want to go where all the action happened. Yeah. And so it's visually stunning. And even, again, down to the most minute logistical detail. Yeah. The Bible says that Mount Sinai had a river, a brook, coming down from the top. And you would need a water source for those sacrifices. You can see where an ancient river used to flow coming down from the mountain, and it comes down right next to this altar. Yeah. So you can be as cynical as you want. Try to imagine, well, how would this actually play out? And you can almost visualize it.
Yeah. When you can combine science and archaeological evidence with the Bible, I believe you have an unbeatable combination. And that's what we're seeing happen more and more today, not only in Saudi Arabia, but in Israel, in Jordan, these amazing archaeological discoveries. I believe for such a time as this, God is revealing this to the world now for this point in history. It's an exciting time to be alive, I tell you. And exciting times for Ryan Mauro. Yes. We have just a little bit of time left. Number one, I want you to tell us where we can see the film. Again, folks, this film, a short film, is viral. Close to 1 million views right now on YouTube. Where can we find the film? Where can we see it?
Sure. So we have a website, SinaiInArabia.com, which is also where people can volunteer or donate to our ongoing research because we have leads that we have not publicly disclosed that we want to follow up on, funding permitting that. And then you can go to SinaiInArabia.com, also sign up for the email list. On YouTube, the name of the film is Finding the Mountain of Moses. And just as I alluded to before, I just want to remind people that a lot of the extremists are talking about this, where extremists linked to the Iranian regime and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and elsewhere are all talking about it. And of course,
you've got all the right enemies.
Right. Of course, they're spinning it as a Jewish plot, but some of them are saying, yes, this is the real Mount Sinai, but it's still a Jewish plot. And then others are saying, this is all made up as part of a Jewish plot.
Yeah.
But this might have geopolitical consequence now.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay, we have about a minute left. Real quick, tell us how this has grown your faith. You said you're a cynic.
Yeah.
Tell us how this has grown your faith.
I'm very open about the fact that I believe I have a strong faith, but I also have atheist days. And the reason I understand God made me so cynical is because as I go through this process where I have a criticism or a doubt, and then I find the answer for it through that process, you go through it 10,000 times, your faith gets stronger. Yeah. And so my cynicism has led to a strengthening of my faith. And I've got to tell you, as powerful as the visual evidence of the Exodus was, and the fact that I got to go there, the coincidences paving the path for me, of all people, when I'm not an archaeologist and I don't feel I'm deserving of this experience, honestly, those coincidences that led me to get there and come home safely 3 times, I mean, that for me strengthens my faith even more than the visual evidence I was looking at.
Well, you're strengthening our faith, Ryan. Thank you so much, my friend. Folks, see this film. Go to YouTube, check it out. Ryan, God bless you, man. Keep it up.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
We'll see you again soon, man. Great. It was great.